Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.
From the St. Louis Public Radio Newsroom, this is The Gateway. It's Monday, March 11th. I'm Jonathan Ahl. Farms across the Midwest use biosolids, a type of byproduct from wastewater treatment plants, to fertilize their land. But toxic forever chemicals called PFAS could be contaminating that fertilizer along with millions of acres of farmland.
I would have never, ever taken a product that I thought was going to completely destroy everything.
How a few Midwestern states are testing for PFAS while many are not. That's coming up on The Gateway. U.S. Senator Josh Hawley issued a blistering critique of fellow GOP Congresswoman Ann Wagner over legislation compensating people who became sick from radioactive waste exposure. St. Louis Public Radio's Jason Rosenbaum has more on the unusual dispute.
Hawley blasted Wagner Thursday for comments she made to the Kansas City Star about how his bill providing restitution for radioactive waste exposure did not have a funding stream. He reiterated that criticism while talking with reporters this past weekend outside a Gray Bar facility in Hazelwood.
I hope every Missouri House member will be a vocal champion of this, but especially somebody who's from St. Louis.
Wagner said in a statement she supports Hawley's bill and is trying to get it placed into critical government funding legislation. Hawley's public criticism of a Missouri GOP lawmaker is rare. Wagner considered running for the Senate in 2018, but chose to run for re-election. I'm Jason Rosenbaum, St. Louis Public Radio.
The Missouri Senate's majority leader is defending a proposed ballot item that would make the state's constitution more difficult to amend. GOP lawmakers want to place a measure that would require a constitutional amendment to pass in a majority of congressional districts. Detractors say the plan would gut the initiative petition process and is a not-so-subtle way to derail a pending abortion legalization proposal. Senate Majority Leader Cindy O'Loughlin says she supports boosting the constitutional threshold.
And if that will offset an effort to try to reinstate abortion, absolutely, I think that's a good thing.
O'Loughlin was a guest on the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. The Federal Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services has imposed a $56,000 fine on the directors of a North St. Louis nursing home that shut down abruptly in December. St. Louis Public Radio's Sarah Fenton reports the agency is fining owners of Northview Village more than $18,000 for each day they were not in compliance with federal regulations.
CMS officials fined Eric Rothner and Mark and Lorraine Suiza after a scathing state report described the closure of the facility on North Kings Highway. Missouri officials found the abrupt closure put residents in jeopardy. The federal agency cited an unsafe evacuation and the facility's failure to keep residents safe from hazards and accidents. Sam Brooks is director of public policy at Consumer Voice, an advocacy group for long-term care residents. He says instead of a fine, CMS should investigate the other facilities the owners operate in the region.
Really a small, it's like a slap on the wrist for folks like this. I've seen $1 million fines, and even that is the cost of doing business.
The Suizas and Rothner could not be reached for comment. I'm Sarah Fenton, St. Louis Public Radio.
The Hazelwood School District disenrolled 40 middle school students in recent weeks, citing expired residency information. Of those 40, 38 have since been re-enrolled after updating the school with their current information. Hazelwood has significantly increased investigations into student residency in recent years, according to an investigation from NPR's Midwest Newsroom and St. Louis Public Radio. Hopi Fink is a staff attorney with Legal Services of Eastern Missouri. The law office has represented Hazelwood families who were investigated and disenrolled by the school district.
The very nature of having these investigations on what appears to be a pretty constant basis, but having this kind of mass disenrollment event, it's concerning for a lot of reasons.
A spokesperson for Hazelwood says the district has a responsibility to taxpayers to make sure students are eligible to attend its schools. Much of the Midwest is continuing to face drought conditions as farmers approach planting season. St. Louis Public Radio's Kate Grumke reports the region has also been abnormally warm.
On top of a record-setting warm winter across the U.S., widespread drought is covering much of the Midwest and Great Plains. This year, Southeast Nebraska farmer Lainey Johnson switched to exclusively growing flowers, in part because drought was making vegetable farming less profitable.
Our farm, we always are just focusing on being resilient. So we try and do as much as we possibly can to avoid that impacting our farm.
There is a silver lining to the dry conditions. It could mean farmers can start planting earlier this year. But experts say a rainier and cooler spring is needed to improve drought conditions. I'm Kate Grumke, St. Louis Public Radio.
Applying organic waste like manure to farmland has been going on for centuries, and biosolids follow the same logic. They're a type of treated sewage from wastewater plants that make a nutrient-rich fertilizer. But a group of toxic forever chemicals known as PFAS are slipping through the cracks and could be inadvertently contaminating millions of acres of farmland. As Harvest Public Media contributor Teresa Homsey explains, few states are regularly testing for PFAS in their biosolids.
Jason Grostick comes from a long line of farmers.
We're 100+ year operation. My grandpa milked cows, my dad milked cows, I milked cows, got into the beef industry. It's in my blood.
But Grostick may be at the end of the line. 2 years ago, he was blindsided when the state of Michigan ordered him to shut down, citing high levels of PFAS in his beef and soil. For years, Grostick had been using biosolids to fertilize his crops, which he then fed his cattle. But he says he was never warned about PFAS.
I took a fertilizer source that was recommended and was EPA approved, and the government dropped the ball by not testing it and assuring it was a clean product.
His entire 400-acre farm has been deemed unusable, and Grostick says he's now near bankruptcy. Michigan has conducted one of the most extensive PFAS investigations in the country, and it's led the state to wastewater plants, biosolids, and eventually Grostick's farm. Stephanie Kammer is an emerging pollutants manager with Michigan's Environmental Department.
We are wanting to get to as low a concentrations of PFAS in our effluent and our biosolids as we can.
PFAS are a group of chemicals widely used in consumer and industrial products, but they don't break down and wastewater plants can't treat them. Few states even screen for PFAS in their wastewater. Michigan goes a step further and sets a standard for PFAS levels in biosolids.
If we have biosolids under 20 parts per billion, we feel pretty comfortable that there isn't like a significant source.
But those standards were set with a lot of uncertainty. The Environmental Protection Agency is expected to release PFAS guidelines on biosolids later this year.
To establish any regulation, I just think this is a little premature.
Emmy Leo is with the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. She says Iowa doesn't have the funding to test wastewater or biosolids, and doesn't plan to until there's more federal guidance.
I think the right approach is to wait for the science to be cleared up of what is the toxicity of the PFAS. Then there is the regulation to establish the limits.
Harvest Public Media reached out to 13 Midwestern states. While 4, including Michigan, have a PFAS biosolid strategy, 9 states said they're not regularly testing and will wait for the EPA's lead. But testing for PFAS in biosolids didn't go far enough for officials in Maine. In 2022, that state banned the use of biosolids altogether after dozens of contaminated farms were identified.
It seems like a pretty common sense approach, I think, to a lot of us to then ban the application.
Shelley McGuire is a policy and research director with the Maine Farmland Trust, which supports the ban. McGuire says while the state investigates farms for contamination, it's also created a $60 million fund to help impacted farmers. She says a similar national fund could encourage states to act.
With PFAS, if you look for it, you will find it. I think other states would be better supported in addressing PFAS if there was a federal safety net.
No safety net currently exists for farmers in Michigan. Jason Grostick has lost his family business, and he's had to break the news to his kids that they won't take over the farm.
And it's not a conversation you want. It's not one I should have to have.
Grostick doubts he's the only farm with PFAS contamination in Michigan or the Midwest. And as more states look at PFAS, Grostick says farmers can't be left behind. For Harvest Public Media, I'm Teresa Homsey.
Harvest Public Media is a collaboration of public media newsrooms in the Midwest and Great Plains, including St. Louis Public Radio. The Gateway is a production of St. Louis Public Radio, a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis. Music by Ryan McNeely of Adult Fur. I'm Jonathan Ahl, and from the St. Louis Public Radio newsroom, this has been The Gateway.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com